What's happening, HD Nation? Zach Edwards here with another episode of the Adventure Box Podcast. That's right, this is a podcast on all things history. Now, right now we're going through the War of 1812 when we're talking about the American history, which is Mondays and Wednesdays. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, we just finished Greece and we are now in Rome. So we're talking about ancient Roman history. And this is fascinating stuff. I love Roman history. Okay, so let's go back to War of 1812. Why is this war so important? This is very important because the War of 1812 basically set up our military complex. It basically allowed us to start creating a real military to show strength around the world. It also showed the world that we were not to be picked on, which was great. This was all things that were, in the end, in the aftermath, it was great. But here's the thing, and this is what everyone needs to know, is that the War of 1812, we don't talk about it much because it was a little war, and it was very unpopular with the people. But before we get into that, before we get into any of this, let's go into the most important parts, is giving you an understanding of what we're going to be talking about, an early summary of what we're going to be talking about as we go into the War of 1812. So today, we're going to be talking about two main things: how and why the United States declared war on Great Britain, and why we were completely unprepared for the fight it would pick. The second one is the first major campaign of the war was where? It wasn't against Britain. It wasn't against France. It wasn't on the sea. It was by land, and it was against Canada. The Warhawks wanted to go after Canada. They wanted to go after Detroit. Remember Quebec? Yeah, that was a big city during the American Revolution and the French and Indian War. And also Quebec and what are the other cities? Not Montreal. Montreal? Yeah, Montreal. There we go. Okay. But before we get into all that, so those are the two things we're going to be focusing on. But before we talk about all of that, let's start off with the declaration of war. Now, why was the declaration of war? Why did we declare war against Britain? Why didn't we declare it against the other countries, or declare it at all? The War of 1812 was not a popular war. So, if it's not so popular, how did it get passed? Well, again, it was the Warhawks. Warhawks are people that that wanted war, that felt that they needed to have war in order to show American strength, and also to stop the British from impressment and to finish the trade issues. Now, this is the interesting part. It was very unpopular with the people. They did not want to go to war with Britain. They had just finished a war with Britain, being the American Revolution. So why did the United States declare war on Great Britain on June 18th, 1812? Well, there's many reasons. The main ones, we've already talked about one of it. It's called impressment. The British Royal Navy basically could pull up aside a U.S. ship, or if they're in port, they can go to the U.S. ship, go on board, and anyone that has any kind of connections to the UK, whether it's born there, citizenship, sometimes other things, those people could be taken, kidnapped, put on a Navy vessel for the British, and forced to serve the British Navy. And if they didn't, they would be held liable and even possibly executed for insubordination. Okay, now there's no records of that actually happening, but there's not many records of the actual people that were on there. There were some records of some, if they kept records of who was taken by them. Now, another thing was there was blockades and trade restrictions. Another reason why we got into war was to stop these blockades. Britain during the war against Napoleon was basically interfering with U.S. trade and creating blockades of different ports. But at the same time, the British were also blocking us as well, though we didn't go to war with them. The British were the main culprit of these things. Now, what else? Okay, another one that's huge. This is big. right at this point, it was the doctrine of manifest destiny. Manifest destiny is the moving west. A lot of the settlers, as industry was coming in, as more immigrants were coming in, people had to move. They had to expand. Where did they have to expand? The only place they could go was west. And so they were moving into Indian territory. Now, I totally understand all those people are not happy with the United States for going against the Native Americans. I have Native American culture in me, or blood in me. But at the same time, these people were moving west. The Native Americans were fighting back. They have full reasons for. Now, the British, though, did not have the right to interfere. And because of their influence and the arms that they were giving to the Native Americans, such as the Battle of Tippecanoe, there were reasons why the Warhawks wanted to go after the British in the West, the forts that they still had. And they did, but not yet. Then the fourth one is the Warhawks in Congress. Now, we've already talked about this, but it was basically a group of young nationalist politicians. So they had the nation in heart. This is the main concern. Henry Clay or John C. Calhoun, two very famous ones, they pushed for war to defend American honor. Now, there is American honor in the sense that we're going against the the three other things that I mentioned. But when it comes to honor in the sense of pride, you hurt my pride, so I'm going to kick your butt. That's not a good thing. So if Britain hurt our pride, and we're going to have to stick up for it, just not exactly the best of reasons to go after them. Now, the other three were very important things, which you can understand why some people wanted to go after Britain. So President James Madison, he was president at the time, after trying and failing to resolve things diplomatically, basically asked Congress, after being petitioned by the Warhawks and other people, not just people in DC in the government itself, but other people that were having struggles because of the war, the tariffs, the tariffs that were there too. There were tariffs there. But also the blockades that were happening with trade and the trade issues that were going on. They all pushed for Madison to drop the diplomacy because it wasn't working and go straight after war. And Congress agreed, barely. I mean, it was barely. I guess it wasn't barely. There's a lot more to it. But okay, basically the vote was the closest of any war in American history. So it was 79 to 49 in the House. Now remember, we have a lot more states, and so we had a lot more House seats. The Senate was 19 to 13. Now, when we say close, it's not a majority. It's I think it's 3/4 of the Congress has to say it. 3/4. Now, a lot of times when we declare war, there's a large majority. Iraq War, Korea, Vietnam, World War II, all of those had enough reason to push for actual war. In this one, it was 79 to 49. Now, that is less than, or it's just above 75%, and I didn't actually look it up. So let's do a little math. Okay, here we go. So I'm grabbing out my calculator. What is 49 divided by 79? Equals 62%. They needed, actually, I think 60% majority. So 60% actually had to give them the rights to go. They had 62%. Normally, it's above 70 to 80%. And again, the Senate, 13 divided by 19. Let's do it. 13 divided by 19. 68%. A little better majority there, but still, it was a close call. Now, what did this actually create? This created a problem. What was the problem? The U.S. wasn't ready. So they declared war first. It was the first thing they did. The second thing is, how do we fight? Well, fighting is another thing. In 1812, the United States was not ready. And I'll tell you some of the statistics that show this. Okay, the U.S. Army had only 1,200 regular soldiers. Many of them were poorly trained and also scattered. Another thing, the government expected state militias to make up the rest. Wait a second. State militias are there to protect the states. The federal government, the federal military, is supposed to take over, or supposed to secure the rest of the country. How do you declare war on Britain if you don't have that? The government was not ready in that sense. But they were, the militias, the state militias, were also disorganized, untested, unwilling to leave home, and untrained. Now, let's go to the Navy. The Navy was tiny compared to the British Royal Navy, which is like decades of strength. Remember, the American Revolution, we didn't have a Navy. We had the French come in and help us. We had sporadic ships that we could grab and turn into a Navy. We didn't really have an actual Navy. Now, here's another one. The country had limited funding. The war taxes were very unpopular coming from the American Revolution. They finally got taxes on it. They were not popular. They ran the government mostly off tariffs, which is like what Trump's doing these days. But that is not sustainable, especially in the size of government that we have right now. Even back then, it wasn't sustainable to sustain a war. The last thing, very important. Politically, the nation was divided. Many in New England opposed the war. They feared it would ruin trade. That's the big thing. Now, interesting enough, those that were down in the South supported the war because of trade as well. They wanted to get ships out and selling to Great Britain and France. And they couldn't do it because, one, there was an embargo. Two, Britain had shut off a lot of the trade. So despite these challenges, the U.S. leaders were confident, we'll put it. They were still confident. They believed it would be a short war and that Canada could be easily conquered. Why? This is the thing that's very interesting. So the colonists became the states. The states did not, or the colonists, those that were in the colonies, remember the American Revolution. They did not want the British to be in power. And so it was easy for them to change. Now, it was interesting because Canada was under the power of Britain, but they considered themselves separate to some extent. And they did not want another country, including the United States, to run them. But we believed, the Warhawks especially, when we get up there and we take over Quebec and Montreal, that everyone will be getting ready to throw up arms and fight. And that would add to our army. Well, and that was one of the reasons why we went to Canada first. So as Thomas Jefferson put it, the conquest of Canada would be, and I quote, a mere matter of marching. We couldn't have been more wrong. Now, the early battles, we'll go over this. Oh, the early battles. The early battles. Okay, so let's bring up a map. I want to bring up a map. Let's bring up a map. Here we go. Here's our map of the United States, the early United States. Everywhere from Georgia, South Carolina, all the way up to Maine. Now, Maine, I don't think was actually part of us yet at this point, but here we have Montreal. Whoops, let's go a little bit higher. Quebec City, Montreal, and then over here, way over here is Detroit. So, the American strategy in the War of 1812, very beginning, was very bold. Maybe too bold. The plan was to invade Canada by what? One, going after Quebec and Montreal. Then, also going after Detroit. Then, going after Niagara Falls. Niagara Falls, really? No, sorry. Not Niagara Falls, Niagara. Crossing the river into another part of Upper Canada. So, Detroit was Upper Canada, modern day Ontario. Then you have Niagara, crossing the river into Upper Canada as well. And also Lake Champlain. This was Lower Canada, basically modern day Quebec. This place right here. Lake Ontario. No, wait. It was Champlain. Wait a second. Oh, no. Wait. Lake Champlain. That one? Isn't it this one? Why? Oh, yeah. That one, sorry. Ha! No, it was coming up through Lake Champlain. Now, you go up here, and you keep walking, and where does it lead you? Oh, look at that, right into Montreal. So, let's go into a few of the early battles. Now, we already talked about Montreal and Quebec quite often. Let's go more into Detroit. You can read about Montreal and Quebec when we go into the text. But today we're going to go to Detroit because, again, we have limited time and I just don't want to talk about these two. Let's go over to Detroit. Detroit, here we go. Okay, so the first major failure came at Detroit. Now, this was General William Hull. Hull was a Revolutionary War veteran, but in 1812, he was well over 50 years old. He was very cautious, deeply unsure about the orders that he was given. So, he marched into Canada briefly, then retreated. Fearing being cut off and isolated, he retreated back. He lacked confidence in his troops and in his own abilities. So then, this is when British General Isaac Brock, working with the Shawnee leader Tecumseh. You know, we talked about Tecumseh last month when we talked about the mixing pot. Or said that, yeah. So they launched a very bold bluff. Brock, the British general, had only a small force, but he dressed up native warriors to look like a massive army. They took all their extra uniforms and gave them to the Native Americans. Tecumseh's warriors surrounded Detroit. Yes, the U.S. actually had Detroit. They surrounded Detroit and created an illusion of a larger presence. Brock sent a demand for surrender, warning Hull that his troops would massacre them if they resisted. Incredibly. On August 16th, 1812, General Hull surrendered to a smaller army without a fight, giving up the fort of Fort Detroit and also the weapons and over 2,000 men. Total disgrace. Total disgrace and a blow to the American morale. Imagine it. The first major U.S. campaign ended without a battle. It was just surrendered. And not only that, it basically handed over British forces a very critical foothold in the Northwest, Detroit. It was a very bad move by Hull. Okay, so now let's skip over and come back over here. I do have a little bit of time. Land Champlain. Okay, now this lake is very interesting. The reason why is this was a much harder battle that would take place at Queenston Heights. This is near Niagara Falls. Sorry, Niagara River. Stop saying that. On October 12th, 1812, U.S. forces tried again. Now, this is Niagara River, and this is near Lake Champlain. So General Stephen Van Rensselaer led a militia-based assault. Now, the Americans briefly gained ground, but reinforcements refused to cross the river. claiming they had no obligation to fight outside of their state. What? What? That's right, because they were from either Vermont, I can't actually remember. Was it Vermont or was it New York? I think it was New York. I'm not 100% sure. But they came over to the border and basically said, we are not crossing over because this is not our fight. It's not our state. So they stopped. The attack basically collapsed. The Americans retreated, defeated. It's 2 to the British, 0 to the US. That is pathetic. That is so sad. Especially the first one, Fort Detroit. That was horrible. This one, sorry militia, you're still part of the US. You're still helping out. And there is a war going on. To the east, so I guess it was actually over here in this area. To the east was Lake Champlain. And this never even got moved. This campaign never even basically started in 1812. The U.S. Commanders were disorganized and the local militias refused to march north. So, by the end of the year, every U.S. invasion had failed. We never actually got up to Quebec or Montreal. Quite sad. Yeah, just a little bit. Okay, so now let's talk about, one second. And now you know the reason why I didn't want to talk about Montreal or Quebec. It's a little embarrassing. But so is Detroit. And so is everything else. That's why we didn't win in Canada. It was a complete and utter failure. So, this is how unprepared we were. This is how bad it was. So now, when there is a war that goes on, we actually have to prepare and make sure that we are ready to fight in the future. So think of the U.S. Okay, so after the War of 1812, what other fights did we have? Not talking about the small ones, the big ones. What were the big ones that we had? We had the Civil War. The Civil War was our own people. It was a civil war. It was North versus the South. Okay, that's one thing. Declaring war, yeah, we're going against ourselves. Not something we have to worry about when it comes to outside forces. Okay, after that, what's next? Okay, there wasn't much. World War I. Okay, by that time, what did we have? We had a near military complex. Now, it was small, but because of what was declared in the preparation for declaring war as our part in World War I, which was after much of the fighting already started, and the same with World War II, we turned our factories into war machines that could pump out military gear, military arms, weaponry, vehicles. For some reason I couldn't figure that word out. Okay, anyways, but this is the reason why Canada failed when it came to this. We were not ready. We did not have confidence, our people. And so all of a sudden, we lost. Here's the thing. In the textbook, you're going to learn a little bit more about what was happening, because these are not the only battles that happen. That's right. We are actually going to create our own navy. Now, it's going to be in the weirdest spot. It's going to be in the very much the weirdest spot. Give me a second. I'm going to show you this one with you too. Okay, do you remember the American Revolution? In the American Revolution, we had the Great Lakes. We had no ships on there. The British had ships on there. So we built a navy by scratch. Interesting enough, interesting part is that we had to do it twice. So we did it during the American Revolution, and now we did another one. This is what? It's building a brand new fleet of ships in the War of 1812. So let me go over this. Let me do this. This was not planned, so a little disorganized, but I wanted to tell you this. Okay. So in early 1813, the United States faced a really big issue. The British basically controlled Lake Erie again. After the American Revolution, we basically had a treaty between them, so we got rid of our ships. Our ships were very disrepair and such. So we didn't actually put ships on there. We didn't think we were going back to war. So at this point, enter Erie, Pennsylvania. Erie had no shipyards, no naval traditions, and limited access to supplies. But under the direction of Noah Brown, he was his shipwrights and also his laborers, they were able to bring on a full fleet between the beginning of 1813 and the summer of 1813. That's basically like 8 months. They were able to build 2 brigs, the Lawrence and the Niagara, and half a dozen smaller vessels. So by the summer of 1813, the fleet was ready. Now, again, no shipyard, no naval traditions. They didn't have the timber. They had to cut it from trees. They didn't have just ready-made Home Depot 2x4s or big slats. They actually had to cut everything. They had to mill everything. And then it was put in the hands of a 27-year-old officer by the name of Oliver Hazard, which is a great middle name, Perry. He was young, he was untested, but he was determined. And they got this all together. So that by September 10th, 1813, Perry's fleet engaged the British under Commander Robert Beckley near, it's called Put-in Bay. It's interesting, Put-in Bay, in what would become the Battle of Lake Erie. Now the situation, Perry had 9 ships, the largest being the Lawrence and the Niagara. The British had 6 ships, fewer guns, but experienced crew. So in this time, they basically said, hey, we need to have this lake. Now before, again, there was a treaty, they didn't have to worry about, they could actually share the lake. But when it came to battle or war, this is when they started claiming the lakes. So this was windy conditions initially, and that favored the British, forcing Perry's ships to sail directly into heavy fire. Perry's flagship, the USS Lawrence, took the brunt of the British barrage. Every gun was disabled, and most of the crew were either dead or wounded, but Perry did not give up. He lowered his battle flag, which read, "Don't give up the ship," and he climbed into a rowboat. Under heavy fire, he rowed to the USS Niagara and took command, and sailed straight into the British lines, unleashing a devastating broadside. And within 15 minutes, the British surrendered. That was the greatness of this battle. This is why this is one of the reasons why I wanted to tell you about this. It was this whole fight in Canada was one of the most remarkable naval victories in the whole Canadian campaign, because everything else was a failure. The victory gave the U.S. finally complete control over the Lake Erie. It forced the British to abandon Detroit, so saving the butts of those that failed the year before. It severed their supply lines and allowed General Harris to launch a successful battle of the Thrains against Tecumseh. Tecumseh, during this battle, was killed, and the native resistance was weakened. Lake Erie had been won not by numbers, but by grit, improvisation, I guess that's the word, and Perry's bold leadership. Those were the things that basically saved Canada when it came to the U.S. Now, the War of 1812 began with high hopes, bold promises, and immediate setbacks because of Canada. The first thing that we went after, we lost every single time until Lake Erie. So early invasion to Canada failed. At that point, Detroit was surrendered to the British. British now had Detroit. But then Lake Erie happened, and they were able to take it all back. So remember, the war is not over. This is just when it started, 1812. I got an engagement question for you. What do you think was the biggest mistake the U.S. made at the start of the War of 1812? And was it the underestimating of the enemies, overestimating of their strength, or the lack of unity? What was it? How about unpreparedness? Underestimating the enemy, overstating their strength? I mean, it could just be that they just weren't they were unprepared. Well, that's the whole thing. That's the big issue. We have to get to the point in the War of 1812 where we are actually prepared to take on the British, which is the largest military in the world, second to France. And then you also had other ones, but on the Atlantic, those were the two that were really coming after us, that could have come after us and taken the United States at this point. Now, in not this week, but next week, we'll actually talk about where the British tried to force that matter. But not yet. Now, we just talked about the Navy in Lake Erie. On Wednesday, we're going to be talking about the Navy that's in the Atlantic and all the triumphs and the failures. So stay tuned, stick with us. Thank you so much for joining us, and we will catch you on Wednesday. Well, tomorrow, if you want to talk about ancient Rome. This great stuff going on there. But yes, we will talk to you very soon. See you back on Wednesday for more on the Navy that would make the War of 1812. Thanks so much for joining us, and we will catch you next time. Take care, everyone. Bye. If you have any comments or questions, add them to the comments below. Otherwise, we'll see you tomorrow, actually. Take care. Bye.